All right, today we're going to talk about some of the planet's oldest, and you could argue, most successful pioneers. I'm talking about bryophytes. Now, they might look small, maybe even a little simple, but don't let that fool you. They made one of the most important evolutionary leaps in the entire history of life on Earth.
Oh, and you've definitely seen these guys before. I mean, they're everywhere, right? They're those green kind of velvety carpets you see on the forest floor, or the stuff clinging to the bark of trees, or even popping up in the cracks of the sidewalk. But here's the thing we often just walk right past. These humble little plants are basically living relics. They're time capsules from a truly pivotal moment in our planet's history. We're looking at the direct descendants of the very first plants to ever leave the water and colonize the land.
So I want you to picture this for a second. A world of just bare rock and empty, sterile soil. That's what Earth was like. And bryophytes, they were the trailblazers that changed everything. So that leads to the big question, right? How on earth did they do it? How did they manage to survive, let alone thrive, in what was basically a harsh alien environment? Okay, so to answer that, we have to go way, way back. To really get what they accomplished, you first have to understand the enormous challenges they were up against when they left their comfy home in the water. You know, for their algal ancestors, life in the water was pretty cushy. The water itself held them up, kept the temperature stable, and, it made it super easy for reproductive cells to find each other. But on land, oh, that was a whole different ballgame. Suddenly, gravity is a huge problem. The air is constantly trying to suck all the moisture out of you, and the sun, wow, the unfiltered sunlight was just brutal. So to deal with all of these new problems, bryophytes evolved this amazing toolkit of adaptations. And we're not talking about just minor little tweaks here. No, these were game-changing innovations that would pretty much set the blueprint for all the land plans that came after them. So what exactly was in this toolkit? Well, first, to keep from drying out, they developed a waxy coating. Okay, problem one solved. Next, to stay put and not get blown away, they evolved simple little anchors. Then, to protect their reproductive cells from that harsh environment, they created these tiny jacketed sex organs. And maybe most importantly, in a huge evolutionary leap, they started to protect and actually nourish their own embryos. And here's a look at that anchor solution I was just talking about. It's brilliant. See, without any true roots, bryophytes came up with these simple filaments called rhizoids. The best way to think of them isn't really like straws, it's more like they're tiny grappling hooks that just grip onto whatever surface they're on. This gives them stability, and it lets them absorb water and nutrients right then and there. It's just a super elegant and effective way to solve a huge problem. Now, it's worth pointing out that the term bryophyte is actually kind of a catch-all name. It's a convenient label we use for three really distinct, ancient lineages of plants. So let's meet the family, shall we? We've got the liverworts, the hornworts, and of course, the mosses. Okay, check out this evolutionary tree, because it really shows their place in the grand story of life. We've got fossil evidence that pushes their origins back at least 475 million years. And you can see it right here. They're sitting right at the base of the entire family tree for land plants. Think about what that means. All the other plants we see today, ferns, giant trees, all the flowering plants, every single one of them is descended from these humble little pioneers. And this brings us to a pretty neat little botanical detail. Technically, bryophytes are not a monophyletic group. Now, that sounds super complicated, I know, but the idea is actually simple. Think of it this way. A true monophyletic family photo has to include the great-grandparents and every single one of their descendants, no exceptions. But because those vascular plants we just mentioned branched off and started their own thing, the three bryophyte groups we're talking about today are more like three separate family lines that just happen to share a really, really ancient ancestor. All right, so first up in the family, the liverworts. Yeah, their name is a little strange, I'll give you that, but you'll often find them as these flat, kind of ribbon-like green patches in the dampest, shadiest parts of a forest. They're actually super common, you just have to know what you're looking for. Next up, we have the hornworts, and they get their name from exactly what you'd think, these really distinctive horn-like structures that produce their spores. They're definitely the hardest to spot of the three, but botanists find them fascinating because their biology is just so unique. And finally, we have the mosses. Okay, these are the ones everybody recognizes. Their ability to form those thick, dense, super water-absorbing mats makes them absolute ecological powerhouses in all kinds of environments. So, for all their amazing adaptations for living on land, all three of these bryophyte groups share one major catch. One big limitation. and that's their unbreakable tie to liquid water. Honestly, this is the key to understanding their entire way of life.
And this life cycle diagram shows us exactly why that water is so critical. Okay, so the main green plant that you see, the leafy part, that's called the gametophyte. Its job is to produce gametes, sperm and eggs. Now here's the crucial part. For fertilization to actually happen, the sperm has to physically swim over to the egg. And that journey is completely impossible without at least a thin film of water. It could be a raindrop, a splash from a puddle, or even just some heavy morning dew.
This whole process is a classic example of what's called alternation of generations. It just means you have two distinct phases in the life cycle. You've got the main, green, gamete-producing plant, and then, growing right out of it, you get this spore-producing stalk, which is called the sporophyte. Two different forms, one single life.
So the big takeaway here is this absolute, non-negotiable need for water to reproduce. They can live on the land, no problem. But to make the next generation, they have to go back to the water. And this dual existence, well, it's exactly why they've earned such a perfect nickname. They're the amphibians of the plant kingdom.
So, okay, they're ancient, they're tiny, but why do they still matter so much today? Well, their legacy is literally written into the fabric of our modern ecosystems, and frankly, they have some abilities that are just astonishing. Just get a load of this. A single type of moss, sphagnum moss, can hold up to 26 times its own dry weight in water. 26 times. That incredible power to soak things up makes it a massive, massive player in the water cycle of entire ecosystems.
But it doesn't even stop there. I mean, these things are basically ecological superheroes. They're the first ones to show up on bare rock and kickstart the whole process of creating new soil. Their dense mats hold that soil in place and prevent erosion. They form peat, which we use as a fuel source and a soil conditioner. And because they're so sensitive to pollution, they act as little canaries in the coal mine. Great indicators of how healthy our air and water are.
So really, the next time you're out and you see a patch of moss on a rock or a tree, maybe just take a second. Remember its incredible story. It's a story of survival, of brilliant innovation, and of profound planet-altering change. You're not just looking at a plant. You're looking at a living link to the very moment life took its first, boldest step onto land. It's a fantastic reminder that sometimes it's the smallest pioneers that have the biggest and most lasting impact of all.